All right, so I think we will kind of get started now. More people will filter in as we go. That's okay. But yeah, just for now, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Tony. I'm here on behalf of ALX. I'll be moderating the session, just sort of keeping track of the chat and keeping the flow. Just to give you an overview of how this session will run today, there's going to be about a 40 to 45-minute presentation by our speaker, after which we'll have a brief Q&A section. So during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat to ask any questions that you might have. I will be keeping an eye out and collect them so that at the end we can make sure to go through all the questions and have a little Q&A back and forth. You'll also have a chance to unmute and chat, ask your question aloud, but if you're a little bit shy, that's all right. It's kind of how I am as well. Please feel free to write it in the chat. If you can, please put your camera on so we can see your face, just so that the session is a little bit more engaging. The speaker may ask some questions. Feel free to raise a hand, unmute, and answer. But please be sure that once you've finished speaking, you mute again, just so that we don't have any interruptions there. Yeah, so if everyone's cool with that, it's my pleasure now to introduce Anwulika Okonjo. Anwulika is an entrepreneur, a digital innovation strategist, and AI product designer. She is founder of Trait, an AI company on a mission to equip ambitious growth stage companies with actionable intelligence for better talent decision making, and Ijeruka, a Pan-African learning community. Today, she'll be giving us a presentation titled The Unwritten Code: How to Thrive and Win Amidst Transformation as a Young African in the AI Economy. And so, without further ado, I turn the floor over to her. Thank you so much for joining us today, Anwulika.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, ALX, Tony, for inviting me to speak. I'm really excited to speak on this topic with all of you, and hopefully we can make this a little bit interactive. So be prepared to respond at certain points, and I look forward to your questions at the end. So I'm gonna jump right in. Awesome. So as Tony said, this session is about how to win as an African in the AI economy, or how to thrive and win. Um, Let me start by asking, how many of you think you need to be able to code, have some sort of technical knowledge, be a data scientist in order to succeed in the age of AI? Let me see a show of hands or indicates in the chat. You know what? I actually just realized that I cannot see the chat. So, Tony, maybe you could tell me if anyone has answered the question.
Yeah, we've got a few thumbs up here in the chat.
Okay. Okay. So, my goal is that by the end of
It
this
as well.
Okay, by the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that I can debunk that myth. You do not need to have technical knowledge. You don't need to be able to code to win in the age of AI. In fact, this is probably one of the best times for people who do not have technical skills. Of course, that's always going to matter. We always need people to develop the systems, to be able to build the AI systems, the models behind them, to build the hardware behind them as well. All of that is extremely important. But what you sort of need to come to terms with, and hopefully this will, I'll give you a few key principles as we go along. But what you really need to sort of adopt into your thinking is that AI has sort of opened up the space so that, I'm sure you hear the word a lot, democratize. It's democratized the space so that whether or not you have technical skills, you'll be able to do the work that you need to do to, sort of realize the ideas that you may have, the visions that you have for yourself and your career a lot more quickly, effectively, and even maybe be more creative by using AI effectively. And I want to show you exactly how to do that. So let's get into it. So I'll give you a little bit of a background to myself. I've had a very windy career. You can kind of call it a portfolio career, and I've had a career that hasn't followed a straight line, and it's essentially been unwritten because I've stuck to two principles. The first is that I choose things that I'm curious about. I choose to follow my genuine and legitimate interests, and that has always served me well. I take risks, and I hope that I encourage all of you to do the same. But in order to succeed in this age and any other, you have to have a courageous mindset. You have to be willing to take the leap. You have to be willing to take risks and not be fearful of what's on the other side. The whole of life is full of risks, essentially. The only way to protect yourself is essentially by sort of sitting in a corner and letting someone else bring food to you and bring, the things that you need to survive. But then you wouldn't be living life. So I think that that's been the underlying principle for me is that I've taken risks and I pivoted. And there's actually a saying that I really like, which is it's better to be right than to be consistent. And you have to adopt that mindset in the age of AI because adaptability is key. The world is changing very, very quickly. The half-life of skills is about 2.5 years from 5 years. So that means that when you develop a skill set, previously, it used to be able to last you for about 5 to 10 years. You could get pretty far. You could develop a career, and yeah, you'd be okay, right? Like you'd be able to sort of get along in life. But with AI, the skills that you need and the ways that the needs of businesses, the ways that governments and organizations are thinking is changing so rapidly. And the skills that you need are also changing very, very rapidly. So you have to have the mindset of adaptability and the ability to pivot. And like I said, take risks. And I'll come back to this principle at the very end, but I want you to keep in mind that you need to grow where the world is going. So how has that been reflected in my career? So I don't have a technical background at all. I actually studied international comparative studies at Duke University. And most of the time when I talk to people, I basically tell them a different thing every time. Like sometimes I tell people I studied politics, sometimes I tell people I studied international relations. It doesn't really matter. The point is that, what I studied was an interdisciplinary degree that allowed me to understand global systems, to study cultures around the world, and also to understand how our futures are constantly in flux. And I was lucky enough because I went to a liberal arts university in the US that I got to take courses in things like entrepreneurship, web design, computer science. I took courses in a wide range of things, and I think that really benefited me. If you go to a school, if you're still studying and you go to a university where, maybe you're studying in one particular area. So I came out of the British system before I went to university in the US. And in that system, you sort of have a core focus. And so, maybe you go and study law or accounting or something along those lines. If that's the case for you, then you sort of have to make room within your life and within your sort of learning plan to expose yourself to lots of different disciplines, lots of different ways of thinking, because that's going to be an essential asset. And that was something that was very valuable for me. The next thing, so when I was in university, I started my first organization, which was called Through the Eyes of African Women. And this was around, it was just at the intersection of COVID, and plus the sort of Black Lives Matter protests, and movements. There was a lot happening in the world. And I felt very moved to support the efforts of women in Africa in particular in reshaping our communities. And so I started a digital platform. I really love the only technical skill that I kind of have, and it's not really anything, is I know how to build websites. So I built a website Squarespace, and I posted on Twitter saying that I wanted to, start this organization. I wanted to document what, young African women were doing in their communities and the ways that they were pushing for change across the continent. And within a day or two, I had a bunch of people who reached out to me saying that they wanted to support this effort. And before I knew it, I was a second year in university running a team of 8 people scattered around the world, mostly in sort of Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya. And we were organizing online learning sessions. We were building digital publications. We were organizing in community protests and sessions in person in the various countries where we were. And so that was a really great way again, just me kind of following my interest. There was no real strategy behind it. It was just, I was just really passionate about women's rights. I was passionate about the changes that I was seeing in the world. And so I sort of followed that lane, and it helped me build this global community. So we went from having a team of 8 to having, I think, yeah, over 1,000 people joining our online events and reading sessions, and in our movements in person. There were hundreds of people who showed up for those, and so I was sort of juggling. I was juggling studying with leadership and essentially building a digital community and learning how to use the online space and use digital technologies to my advantage to, at the time, push for social changes. So once I graduated from university, I actually started as a brand strategist at a social impact communications agency. I absolutely love that. It taught me some really key skills in communications, in design, essentially, but also just again helped me see the behind the scenes of how large global organizations make decisions and where some of those gaps are. But I didn't just want to communicate change; I wanted to actually create it. So I left and I started my own I started a new company. This time I wanted it to be a private business. So, and it was called Ijeruka, which is a Pan-African learning community. And essentially what I did was I would, again, just out of sheer passion, reach out to experts around the world, experts of African descent, many of whom were teaching at, top universities like Stanford, Harvard, MIT, but also emerging voices across the continent, people from Abuja, from Nairobi, who were doing things that I thought were really interesting in their fields. And I would curate these online learning experiences. I would ask them if they would speak. And from there, I went from sort of curating these online courses to then trying to build my own, and at the time, actually working with developers to build my first sort of e-learning platform. And so my path, like I said, has been very, very windy, and it was really successful. I really enjoyed it. We had in the first course that I curated was called Radical Hope, Rerouting Pan-African Histories and Future. So it had really nothing to do with the sorts of technical skills that ALX teaches. It was very much about like African history, and but it brought together such incredible people from all around the world, and yeah, I think so. The business was growing. Over the course of that year, we had several online courses and events. And sort of realized that for me to take it to the next level, and also seeing the introduction of AI, there were certain skills that I needed to develop that I knew I was going to, I could do it on my own, but I was going to struggle a little bit. So I decided to apply for a job with an organization called Apolitical, which is the largest social learning network for governments in the world. There are about 250,000 public servants. So think about like LinkedIn plus LinkedIn Learning, but specifically for governments. And so I applied for the job, and it was really unique in the sense that they had launched this government AI campus. And the entire purpose of the campus, it was funded by Google and the Rockefeller Foundation. And the entire purpose of the campus was to train governments to be ready for the age of AI. And up until this point, I didn't really have any specific skills in AI. I was an enthusiast. I mean, my father's a computer engineer, so I've always been around tech. Like I said, I built sort of digital. I built 2 digital organizations up to this point, but I didn't have a specific skill set in AI. So why would they hire me for a senior learning design role on the government AI campus to be their in-house AI expert? Well, the answer to that is really 2 things. One, they weren't really hiring for the AI expertise. I'm going to come and I'm going to elaborate on this principle later on. But what they were looking for was someone who knew how to learn, knew how to talk to people. They're subject matter experts who um, do have that sort of deep expertise in how artificial intelligence actually works. But the vast majority of public servants, of people, civil servants working in governments around the world, don't really actually trying to do is figure out, the basics, figure out how it's going to change the countries that they're governing and and how also it's going to change their roles. So they were looking for someone who had an interest in AI, who could learn very quickly about how AI works at a high level, and who could essentially kind of be a translator in working with subject matter experts to elaborate sort of the foundational elements of AI for governments, right? And so that's where I kind of came in. So I did my research. I again, like a tech enthusiast in general, I had been researching AI, I'd been reading a lot, reading really widely around it. So when it came to the interview and came to the actual role, I had a lot more expertise than some of the other people who were just, regular learning designers coming from education and things like that, because I had that sort of passion and sort of um, I had a good foundational knowledge of how AI functioned and what the key issues were. And coupling that with my degree in international studies, it was sort of the perfect meeting point for this organization. And so I was there for the last year and then recently left to start my new company. So like I've said, it's been a very winding path. Nobody told me go do this, go do that. Of course, my dad would have loved for me to be a lawyer. Um, he still probably wants me to be a lawyer. But I chose to kind of, write my own path. And so far it's been successful because of the principles that I'm about to kind of go through with you. Okay. So will AI take your job? This is probably a question that is on your mind. It's on a lot of people's minds. And you may have heard a couple of things. You may have heard, yes, AI will take your job. And, there's a lot of sort of pessimistic narratives around that. You may have heard, no, AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will. And you may have heard, that's ridiculous. AI could never replace humans. And the truth is, somewhere in between. So I want you to think through these four questions. These questions will help you determine how, let's say, at risk your role might be. The first is, do you work mostly in isolation or do you rely on collaboration and team dynamics? Do you primarily take orders and follow standard or operating procedures? Or do you have a role where you're pretty much on the go? Like you have to improvise, you have to think critically, right? Like you have to digest information as it's coming in and adapt. Is your work highly repetitive and predictable? And is your value measured by efficiency or by creative problem solving? If the answers to these questions are mostly yes, so yes, you work in isolation. Yes, you mostly follow SOPs. Yes, your work is kind of repetitive and predictable. And yes, it's measured more by efficiency. Um, then I'm sorry to say that it probably is at risk. And that's something that we all have to sort of contend with. So I don't want you to panic or get scared or anything like that, but it is important to really do a proper sort of debrief and audit with yourself to say, hey, look, is my role something that AI could take over? Because AI, is essentially trained to be able to replicate the human brain to an extent, right? So that's the point of artificial intelligence. And AI is getting better every day, but really what it's good at is tasks that are repetitive and efficiency based and have standard procedures. And so what you really want to do is let's go into the six principles. But what you really want to do is to just take stock of that. And hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be able to start to put together a plan for what it looks like to essentially kind of um, build your guardrails or build your system and your game plan so that even with these things in mind, you can succeed, right? Okay, so let me. So I'm going to talk through 6 moves that you need to make to win in the AI economy. Let's start here. So the first thing I want to say is that you need to think about playing the long game. So you know, these 6 moves that I'm going to talk through are not just for today. They're a strategy to help you operate across all 3 horizons. And when I say horizons, I'm talking about there's a concept called the 3 horizons model. So the first horizon is the now. You can ask yourself, for example, how can I use AI this week to do my current job faster, better, and smarter? So that's about immediate value and immediate efficiency. Then horizon 2 is the next or the emerging. This is about how can I use AI over the next year, or how can I develop my personal AI operating plan and strategy over the next year to create new value and opportunities in my particular role or for myself and my industry. So this is really about creativity and innovation. And then lastly, Horizon 3 is about the future. So, what's the sort of transformational future, your visionary path. So, what fundamental human needs or big problems can I help solve in the next five years? Let's just cap it at 5 years by leveraging AI. This is your long game. And I love this book by Dory Clark, who actually happens to be a professor at my alma mater at Duke. And it's called The Long Game: How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. This is a really, really valuable book. If you do have the time, if you like to read, I would go and pick this up. But yeah, so keep in mind that as we're going through this, put these principles in context for those 3 horizons and really try and think about the long game, not just the short-term wins, right? Okay, so, okay, move 1, audit your humanity. So I told you that my background is not technical. It is in ICS, in women's rights, in learning design, and social communication, all of these things, right? So what are these skills? What are the skills that I was developing? And what are the skills that you need to develop? These are critical thinking, creativity, emotional intelligence, empathy, ethical judgment, complex negotiation, the ability to understand systems, the ability to be able to, I mean, AI, for example, is good at prediction, right? And it can sort of, that there are predictive models that can sort of tell you the likely possibilities for the future. But there's a lot of variables in human behavior, and there's a lot of things that it doesn't see moving in the everyday environment. So being able to be responsive and aware and tuned into your environment is a real premium, right? It's not just fluff. And if you listen to any sort of major research institution, any major business, they are doubling down on these skills, right? These are true leadership skills. They are premium, right? These are tasks. These are skills that AI cannot automate. So think of, for example, a doctor. An AI can analyze an X-ray faster and more accurately than a human. And there have been incredible advancements in the medical field, but it can't sit with a patient and understand their fears, explain a complex diagnosis with empathy, and help a family make a difficult decision. That is the human premium. So, what I would love for you to do is to write down the 5 most important tasks that you do in your role currently. And then think about which of them requires deep creativity, strategy, or empathy. That's where your job security lies and growth, and that's where your growth lies. And that's where you need to invest. Another way to think about this, if your role doesn't have any of these, and I'm sure if you think hard, even in a role that has like a lot of repetitive work, there are going to be areas where you can sort of double down on some of these skills that we've mentioned, that I've mentioned. But even with that, it's really important now, and this is the greatest opportunity that you'll possibly have to hone in on your unique gifts. And the ways to do that are to think about this PICS framework. So that's passions, interests, causes, and skills. What activities make you feel energized and fulfilled? Which fields would you like to explore more deeply? What changes do you want to see in the world? And how do you envision contributing to that change? And then lastly, what skills do you excel at and enjoy using? So as you think about, first think about the five tasks that I mentioned and which of them requires deep creativity, strategy, or empathy. And then think about these four questions. And as you start to put these together, you'll begin to sort of put together a picture of what opportunities or what sorts of opportunities you should be looking out for, either within your role or something that you can create for yourself. And I really, I'm an entrepreneur, so I really believe in if nobody's going to hand you the life that you want, nobody's going to hand you the perfect job. So whether you're an entrepreneur, someone who's working within a company, or you start your own thing, you have to be able to be clear on the answers to these questions so that you can shape your direction for yourself, and you have that sort of leverage, and you can have those conversations either with your manager or with your co-founder or whatever. But this is a great opportunity to really kind of tailor your career, tailor your role, or tailor your business to match your strengths, your passions, your interests, and your skills. Okay. So the next thing is that you need to become a translator. So, like I said, I was hired at Apolitical not because I'm an AI, deep technical AI expert, but because of my ability to, and it was a very long interview process and there were a lot of assessments and things like that. But through that, I had to demonstrate the ability to translate technical sort of concepts with AI and how AI works into real world business and social needs. And for apolitical, that was government needs, right? So, did I have an understanding of what was happening within the sort of field of government and international politics and things like that, right? And how AI sort of influences those changes and the kinds of concerns that would be coming up for public servants, the questions that they'd have, and a lot of the time, what you'll find is that technical people struggle to speak in non-technical terms and just use plain language, right? So if you have the ability to do that, you will really fly, right? Like you become the sort of go-to person within your organization for answering those types of questions. And so this means that in your role, you need to identify the problem spaces that are coming up in your industry, in your role, and figure out how to articulate it in a way that a technical team can understand, right? So if you help the technical team understand the sort of the social and the human elements, and help the humans in your team, the people, understand the AI perspective. And so a great way that you can do this is very, very simple. Every week, read one article, watch one YouTube video in your field about AI, essentially, right? So if you work in agriculture, look for an article or a video about AI in agriculture. If you work in tech, AI in tech. If you work in civil service, AI in civil service. So once you start to just expose yourself to AI in your industry, you'll become the go-to person when people are asking questions about what does this mean. And trust me, you'll probably find that you become the most knowledgeable person very quickly. And you're actually answering pretty simple questions, right? Like these are not going to be overly complex questions that you have to write like a 3,000 page thesis on. Um, Sorry, just give me one moment. Okay, can you all hear me? Apologies for that. Okay, cool. All right, so the next thing that I will point to is you do need to master human computer interaction. And the best way to think about this is essentially like if you work at a company, AI is your new teammate, right? So they are another employee, right? And you probably have heard some talk of like agents, and people are actually assigning personalities to, to different AI systems. Apologies, I'm just hearing a noise. Okay, sorry. Apologies for that. So you need to learn how to deal with AI itself, right? So that means learning how to prompt, learning how to work with data. And again, I don't mean building the data systems themselves. I mean understanding how to interpret data, how to answer data questions generally. And the great thing is that, again, AI sort of simplifies the ability to sort of interpret and work with data for non-technical people. But you need to know how to prompt AI effectively, right? So this diagram here is essentially a simplified version of what a good prompt looks like. So you explain to the AI what its role is, right? Like you are my assistant today, or you are my, expert in learning design or whatever. You give it a clear instruction. You sort of indicate to it that the format that you want it to produce its output in. You give it more context so it understands the background behind the instruction that you're giving it and what you're trying to achieve. If you can give it examples, and then you ask for an output. And if you think about it, the the structure of an effective prompt is the same structure of giving a good instruction to your coworker, right? Or giving your coworker background. You think about it, like if you're in a workplace and you want someone to do something, you need to explain to them what their role is, right? Like what are they contributing to this task? You need to give them a clear instruction. You need to give them examples. You need to explain the context behind the task. So it's really the same thing as like knowing how to talk to a person effectively in the workplace, right? And so it's not rocket science in any way, but it will sort of equip you with a core superpower. And there are lots of courses on effective prompting. Google has some for free. Microsoft does. Pretty much every OpenAI also has its own free courses on effective prompting. So if you just Google how to prompt effectively, or Google data literacy foundations, you will be able to find a bunch of resources that can get you started. Okay. Mhm. All right. So another thing that I would say, so move forward, is you need to have high standards. Um, how many of you have heard that, like, there's in Africa, we have a problem with having high standards or low standards? It's an unfortunate stereotype, but it is something that comes up a lot. And the thing is that we do live in a globalized world, and the standards that exist globally are the same standards that are now going to apply to you, no matter where you are in the world. Um, and with AI, the bar has 100% been raised. If you just think about it, there's a statistic, I think it's like 35% of entry level roles in the UK. I'm not sure what the global statistic is, but 35% of entry level roles are now gone, right? Or are essentially, yeah, are just not being hired for anymore, because the bar for what employers are looking for has been raised. And a lot of those rudimentary tasks have been handed off to AI. So you also need to have a higher standard for what you consider to be good work. I'll give you an example. In my company, my co-founder is actually on the call. So Trait, there was a time where, if you looked at like the Silicon Valley bros and the things that they were creating, there's the concept of the MVP, right? And that's your minimum viable product. So that's a thing that, like, it doesn't look good. It doesn't, it probably isn't that great, but you can probably get people to like use it, because there's nothing like it out there or whatever. The bar was a little bit lower, right? So you didn't necessarily have to have a great product in order to get your first customer, or to convince someone to use it and pay you for it. However, with AI, that has now changed, right? So, you know, because you can now use tools like Replit and Lovable and even, even Claude and, I'm naming a few AI tools here. Um, you can spin up a sort of MVP, or an app or a digital based product a lot faster. And people can do it for themselves as well, right? And so, in order to get that first customer or to persuade someone to pay you, you need to not give them just an MVP, a minimum viable product. You need to give them an MLP, which is a minimum lovable product. You need to produce value for them, right? And so that's what people are looking for because the same way that you can now use AI to do your work more effectively and to help you with all sorts of things, people are also able to produce value for themselves. So you need to think really critically and have conversations with people to figure out what is that threshold for for good for them, right? And what is the threshold within your company? What is the threshold within your business industry? And what is that minimum lovable product if you're building a product that you have to hit, or what is that minimum lovable outcome if it's in a business, right? Like have a conversation both with your customers if you're an entrepreneur or with your manager and your sort of senior leaders to figure out what is their standard, right? And measure up to it. And then just for yourself as well, like this is an exciting thing. Like you should have higher standards for yourself and what you're able to accomplish because AI gives you the ability to sort of amplify your strengths and your skills, right? So that means you can do more, right? So you can have bigger goals, you can have bigger visions. You shouldn't limit yourself. It's an exciting thing. And I know it's scary, but if you don't deliver, AI or someone else will using AI will. And so I've kind of come full circle back to what I said at the beginning. Okay. Move number 5. All right. So build contextual intelligence. The fact that you are African is golden. It's a good thing, right? Like it's not a handicap in any way. Global AI models are trained on global data, and global for the most part means Western, right? Like it's not universal. There are things that apply to all of us, but I'm sure that you will know that, it can't respond in certain languages. It doesn't understand, elements of our culture and our context. And so your ability to, again, be a translator of sorts to really understand where you come from, to understand local challenges, um, and to have that sort of depth of contextual intelligence is really, really valuable. It's valuable for whether or not you're working for a global employer or working for a local employer. I will also give you an example from the entrepreneurship perspective. So when Collins, my co-founder, and I were coming up with Trait, we I initially knew that I wanted to build a product within the learning design space. And I did that same sort of question, the 4 questions that we went through at the beginning to determine, the status of my role. And I kind of found that the learning design role was at serious risk. So even if I wasn't already an entrepreneur and like had that intention to go back to working for myself, if I'd stayed at Apolitical as a learning designer, I would have been at real risk because my role was so repetitive. I was using AI for everything anyways. Like in the next couple of years, I'm pretty sure that AI is the learning design role is going to look very, very different. So I knew that essentially I wanted to build the thing that was going to take over my job in a couple of years' time, right? So that's why I left. That's what we're doing now. But when we started to look into the problem space, we centered Africa. Like we wanted to build a product for that would address the talent gap specifically in the African context. And it was really valuable to actually have a focus on Africa because we have a lot of the sort of traditional thinking around learning and development within the West is it's difficult to explain this without fully explaining what the product is, but it's very kind of like siloed. And there's a repetitive way of thinking that is the people are really struggling to overcome. Like there's large organizations, some of them in our industry, Eightfold, Beamery. There's really, really large organizations that have billions of dollars of funding. They've been around for a really, really long time. And because they're serving the US, the UK, and there's a way that the learning and development industry has worked for a long time, there's these major blind spots that we were just really kind of baffled by, in a sense, like, why are these organizations not picking up on this? And the reason why we were able to sort of think around it was because we were thinking from an African perspective. So let me give a little bit more clarity. So, like I said, the half-life of skills is has shortened, right? Like, it's now 2.5 years from 5 years, which means that people need to be rapidly and continuously upskilled, right? And in Africa, we have the fastest growing population in the world, right? 40% of the world is going to be African by, I think it's like 2050, right? So not very much time at all. And we need a way to train all of those people. But within the continent, we don't really have a formalized uh, a lot of employers don't necessarily pay for formalized training for their employees. And it's sort of seen as like an afterthought rather than something that's a must have right off the bat, right? A lot of the training happens on the job. That's very different from the US, where a lot of companies have internal L&D teams and all of these things. And so we knew that from the African perspective, in order to train all of these people who are primarily being trained within their roles, right? Like by doing the work in their roles, we needed a way to essentially make it more valuable to employers, to give them a direct line of sight between the the training for employees, right? And the investments that they make employees and the value that it produces for the business. But when you have an industry like in the US, where the learning and development industry has been entrenched in one way of doing things for so long, they are really struggling to adapt. And they don't have that same level of urgency that we have on the continent in providing that direct value, right? And so this is just an example of how thinking about Africa and thinking about the specific challenges that we face as Africans and the need to produce value and to upskill quickly has enabled us to come up with an innovative idea that our US and Western counterparts might struggle to arrive at those same conclusions, right? But it's still something that's valuable globally. So I would say that for you, the biggest opportunities are not necessarily in cloning the Silicon Valley approach, but to think about what are the local challenges, what are the specific areas within your context that you can uniquely develop intelligence and expertise on and translate that for others, and how can that sort of propel you to become more innovative, to become more creative in your thinking about those problems, because it may seem like it's obvious at first, but trust me, we all have different ways of approaching problems. And you should not discount the perspective that your experience and your exposure as an African, no matter where you are, gives you, right? Okay. And also the boom means that there's a lot of companies that are going to be coming onto the continent, and there's a lot of employers that are coming in, and they're going to need that local and that contextual intelligence, right? So they're going to need you to have that knowledge if you are working for an employer. All right. So how many people have seen the M dash? Do you guys know what the M dash is? Just let me know in the chat, or you can unmute. But you may have seen this thing about M dashes. And basically there's like this trope that yeah, I can see some comments. So yeah, so these tropes that like AI overuses the M dash. And so now it's like if you use an M dash, like you must be AI, right? And I think that's really funny. But the point that I want to get across is, ooh, one. Oops, sorry guys. I made like a little, yeah, okay. So anyways, the point that I want to get across here is that in a world where people feel like AI is everywhere, right? Your humanity really, really matters, right? And trust is really important. So let me go to this. I apologize for the sound. Um, So ignore so anyways, what I was trying to get across with that video is that you can see clearly that that's a deep fake, right? Someone has used AI to replicate lots of different characters and people singing the same song, right? And as AI becomes more advanced, and you've probably seen some AI generated videos, if you're in a WhatsApp chat with, your African moms or aunties, they probably sent you something and they thought it was real and it's definitely not real, and you have to try and explain that to them, and at some point it's going to become so advanced that it's really difficult to tell the difference. And so in a world where that is the case, your ability to build trust with people, relationships with people is really, really, really important. And so what you need to think about is like, I'm trying to get better at this. To be honest with you, I sort of grew up in an age where again it's digital technologies. I'm used to like sending someone a text, or like everything is mediated through a screen. And one of the things that I'm having to learn is or relearn is how to actually just see people in person. Ask for the in-person meeting, make the phone call, right? Like build relationships with people, let people see your face, hear your voice. That way they know what you are uniquely like and they can't attribute it to AI, right? And people are more likely to hire you, to do business with you if they know you, right? And if they trust you. And so that is really a premium. Build your trust network and be authentic. And especially like the M dash example gives you a clear example of the fact that like people are looking for signs that something is human, right? And so flaws, imperfections, um, they are also unique, your unique writing voice, your way of speaking. I know I said earlier that you have to have high standards, but having high standards doesn't mean perfection. What it means is that you know how to take accountability, you think things through, right? You can communicate effectively, but it's okay to also be flawed. That is part of what it means to be human, right? And people are looking for that. That's part of what it means to exist in relationship with other people. Okay, let's skip that. Okay, so those are the 6 moves that you need to make in order to thrive and win in the age of AI. But there are also some things that I will call the fine prints that you need to be aware of. The first is cognitive debt. Does anyone know what this means? Have you come across the term cognitive debt before? No? Okay. So basically, what cognitive debt is when you over rely on AI, it actually starts to dull your own critical thinking, right? So think about like when you use Google Maps. If you use Google Maps and you walk around your city or whatever you're trying to get somewhere, you will learn to use Google Maps, right? Like you've gotten really good at using Google Maps, but you probably don't know the names of the streets that you walk through. You're probably not that familiar with the environment around you. I know I'm terrible with directions, and Google Maps has made that even worse. I lived somewhere for like 10 years and I barely knew how to get there without using Google Maps. So it's the same thing with AI. This is a real problem. It's not fantasy, and it happens fairly quickly. So the more that you rely on AI to, to think for you, the more that capacity, what you're telling your brain is that I don't need this, right? So you need to think critically about how are you actually using AI, right? Like it should bolster your thinking, it should refine it, it should be a good sparring partner, but you shouldn't outsource your thinking to AI completely, because then you get what is called cognitive debt. You can use it as a starting point, but don't use it as a finishing point, essentially. The next thing that you need to think about is privacy and surveillance. And if you're not in the policy space, then, it can sort of feel like, oh, this doesn't really matter, or I can't do anything about that. But it's actually really, really important for you to be aware of the privacy risks when using AI. So you don't want to have, so AI is trained on our data, not all the time. Companies have different policies, and you do not actually need to check whatever AI system you're using. Look into it. There should be very simple, they should have some sort of like a simple statement of how they approach your data. They should have the ability for you to opt out. But it is being trained. It's, data is information. And where is it getting that information? From all of us. So you need to be conscious of what information you're giving your systems that you're working with. And also just, I don't want to lie to you. Like I am fully aware, like, this is a difficult thing to grapple with, but AI can replicate extractive colonial logics, right? If you think about it, the systems are being built and based primarily in, again, Western nations, by people who have had access to power and who have, sort of perpetuated, yeah, not great things in the world. And that same sort of extractive logic and even the materials and natural resources, all the things that are needed to build AI systems and maintain them, the people who check the AI that do the training and all that stuff, they're mostly coming from developing countries. And so you don't need to burden yourself with all of this, but it is something to be aware of and don't completely sort of like, put it off your shoulders, right? Like pay attention to what's happening within the policy space, pay attention to the policies, for the systems that you're using specifically. Opt out whenever you feel like there's a risk, or if you just don't want them to train their systems with your data. Yeah, just good to have a sort of consciousness and awareness in general. Okay, and then lastly, inequality is real. So AI can widen the gap, and again, like I said, who's building the systems? Africa does risk becoming a consumer market, right? So we don't want to essentially be ruled by other people. So it's really important for us to set our own rules. That's why we need more Africans from all backgrounds who know how to use AI effectively, but also know how to shape the technologies and are building products in this space as well. It has to be built by us, not just for us. Okay. So yeah, in general, the principle that I want to get across is that you need to grow where the world is going, right? All of these principles are these moves that you should make will equip you to be able to grow where the world is going. And yeah, that's really the key point. Pay attention to what's happening in the world and adapt effectively. So that's it. Thanks. Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna ask for one more thing. If you all, I think just as a learning designer, I'm sort of predisposed to ask people to reflect on what they've learned. So this is a great framework for doing that. Think about what you liked, what you learned, what you're wondering about. So what are you still curious about and want to explore more, and what you will do. What's your next step based on this talk? And hopefully you liked something. Hopefully you learned something. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was awesome. We have just a couple minutes for some questions if anyone would like to ask quickly. But there's been a couple in the chat that we can start kick us off with. So someone wrote, quoted you, "It's better to be right than be consistent." Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times in life, you start going down a path. Let's say that I am, in a job, I've been there for 2 years, 3 years, and you know that this job is dead end, it's not going anywhere. Your role is probably going to be automated out. But because you feel like you committed to this path, you're too scared to pivot. And so where the principle of it's better to be right than to be consistent, it's not that consistency doesn't matter, but awareness, situational awareness matters, right? And it's better to pivot and make that change and take that risk than to just keep continuing down the same path just because you said that you will. And I think that, especially for us as Africans, especially if you're coming from households where, yeah, you probably have been told to take the safe routes or to go and study to be a doctor or something along those lines. You need to have the courage as well to be able to tell the people in your life, whether it's your parents or whoever, that this is what I'm doing. It may not make sense to you, but based on the information that I'm receiving and my gut instinct, but also like from actually paying attention to what's happening in the world, I feel like this is the right move for me to make and stick by it and see where it goes. Yeah, nobody has the answers. So,
Very, very good advice. I think we have time for just about one more question. So if anyone would like to raise their hand and ask, I'll give you just a couple of seconds to do so. Otherwise, yeah, go ahead. You can unmute.
Okay, so hello everyone. So my question is, since I'm enrolled for data science, and so data science is based on making predictions using AI models and stats, mathematics, all these combinations are based on data. So does that not make it a career that's like not so safe with AI? So how do I work around that?
no, no, no. Everything I said still applies to you. So again, a lot of there's kind of two ways to think about it. One is how will AI augment your role? That's actually where I would focus. So some of the training that you have received to date may be outdated, right? What you need to look at is how is my data science career, how is this field evolving with AI? Because there are going to be new systems, new technologies that are the standard systems. There's going to be new ways of thinking, new practices. That's what you need to tune into. So you don't need to dump that career path. You just need to figure, again, grow where the world is going. Where is this industry going? What tools, what is the new thinking, right? And rather than trying to like, let's say you took a course on data science from like 5 years ago, or that was created like 5 years ago or something, it's probably not going to be very useful. And what I would actually do is start to reach out to people on LinkedIn who are in the data science field, and who are, sort of leading in their industries in that field, and ask them about what you need to do in order to be the best data scientist possible. And think of yourself as build yourself and your career and your skill sets to be an AI native data scientist. That's a difference. Sorry to take up time, and Tony, I don't know if you mind us like just going a little bit over. Um,
Okay.
but I took a course recently in AI product design, and I really enjoyed that course. And a lot of the people on that call were product designers, but it was totally new to them because the product design profession is changing so dramatically with AI. So now we're all trying to figure out how to adapt to become AI native product designers, which is a different way of thinking, a different set of tools, a different skill set. So that's what really matters. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. I see someone's hand is raised. Oh yes, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, you can go for it. We can take just this one last one.
All right. Thank you. Please, my question is, how can small businesses or startups compete in AI innovation against tech giants with vast computational resources?
Mm. How can small businesses compete with AI giants? So I'm gonna say two things. One, you can't compete. Okay, maybe this is a contradiction. You can't compete with them and you can compete with them. So you can't compete with them in the sense of like you cannot go head to head with a tech giant that has like more data, the users, the money to be able to go much faster than you. That's just not possible. What you can do is solve the problems, the very specific and hyper focused problems that they are overlooking and unable to dedicate the resources and attention to, right? So hone in on find a very specific niche. Actually, niching down is probably your greatest sort of strategic move. Speak directly to customers and hone in on what are the problems that tech giants just won't really touch, either because it feels like it's not valuable for them, right? Or because they don't have access to that audience in the same way that you might be able to, right? And solve immediate problems for people. I showed you that three horizons model. Most of the tech giants are going to be focused because they have the money and the ability to do this on the long horizon, right? They have the research scientists, they have all the people. So they're going to be focused on horizon 2 and 3. You can and I'm not contradicting myself by saying this, you should still have a long game, but you need to really own Horizon 1 and 2, essentially. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. But I can't
Thank you
say
very
specifically
much.
unless I know your specific industry.
Yeah, you did. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anwulika. I really appreciate you taking the time out for this today. I definitely found it really informative. I hope that you've all also found it super informative. I know that I'll definitely take away those 6 principles and that fine print with me as I think about AI and how it's going to advance my career as well. And just for all of you on the call, this is just a really another important example of how we dare to dream big and dare to do more at ALX. And to sort of direct your attention at our ACE course, which it basically goes over all of these amazing principles as well, but also helps you learn how to prompt and use AI, not just learn how to use it now, but learn how to adapt and use it as it evolves. So definitely take a look at that. But yeah, again, thank you, Anwulika, for this enlightening session, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you all.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you.